I'll call you when I'm parking. Cool.
Valentine's Day, love is giving at the new Pandora Boutique at Jared, the Galleria of Jewelry. For a limited time, come discover the Loving Hearts of Pandora gift set. This stunning set includes the Loving Hearts of Pandora necklace and sparkling love earrings, all packaged in a beautiful keepsake box. And it's only $125 while supplies last. It's the Pandora gift that will make your Valentine's heart skip a beat. That's why he went to Jared. See store for details.
Oh, 'cause 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 like the little plastic soldiers that have a plastic parachute. You're supposed to drop them from somewhere, and the plastic parachute sort of expands. And
oh, what did you call them?
Poopa Troopers.
Really? I didn't quite believe Hannah about this, but she looked it up. It's true. Poopa Troopers.
I just did a Google image search
Okay.
for Poopa Troopers, and I'm seeing images of the little guys.
But wait, is it a generic name or is it a brand name?
I think it's a brand name. I think from what I'm seeing here, Imperial Poopa Troopers.
His Highness, 4-star General Poopa Trooper.
Yes, exactly.
Back to the plot here. Hannah and her new friend Lindsay go to the top of the Seattle Space Needle to try out their prizes.
So we got in the little elevator and ran to the top and ran to the edge and threw the Poopa Troopers over the edge because there's nothing to stop you really.
Yeah.
And we were just like in peals of laughter, and we thought it was so hilarious, and it sort of broke the ice in our friendship.
Lindsay and Hannah become best friends all through high school. Cut to senior year, 4 years later, another orchestra trip. This time to Reno, Nevada. Hannah and Lindsay are in a hotel room studying.
And so Lindsay and I are both sitting at the desk in this hotel room in Reno, Nevada, and a Poopa Trooper comes flying out of the sky and lands on the windowsill of our hotel room, where we both, like, we couldn't believe it. We opened the window and we grabbed the Poopa Trooper and we ran into the hall to try to, like, find other people in our orchestra. Like, we thought someone had been playing a trick on us, but no one knew what we were talking about. No one even remembered the thing in Seattle. And so I still, to this day, don't know why that happened.
Every once in a while we get pitches like this at the radio show. Coincidence stories. And since they don't really fit into our usual every week we bring you a theme format, we've been setting them aside, wondering what to do with them. They mean so much to people.
I don't know, it felt like it was about our friendship. It felt, I'm not someone that believes in God, really, but it felt a little bit like an act of God or something, like just sort of cosmic and larger than us.
Finally, it hit us. If we got enough of them, we could put them on the radio as their own thing. So we put out a call to listeners. Send us your coincidence stories. And you did. Hundreds and hundreds of you did. We've read at least 1,300 coincidence stories, interviewed dozens of people. Here are just a few things we've learned. You're most prone to coincidences when you're young, teens or 20s. Lots of coincidences involve your grandmother. You're likely to experience a coincidence if you're in or near the Netherlands. Coincidences also happen to you in or near airplanes or on Craigslist. For many of you, coincidences were the answer to your prayers or helped you find your missing bike. Also, there are coincidences hidden in your name, your keys, your clothes, your address. Like when Flora and Rogaciano Pena first started dating.
When we met, he said that he was born in Salmonelli, and I said, well, I was too. And then when we were going to get married and we needed our birth certificates, we compared them, and it was the same building.
We heard stories about a lost roll of film discovered, coincidentally, in the stomach of a decomposing hyena. About the man who got his favorite t-shirt back from a stranger's knapsack in Slovakia. About the woman who was dating not one, but two Mark Steven Andersons at the same time. About the student whose car broke down in rush hour on a busy highway, and the one person who just happens to stop who comes to her rescue. It's her dad, who lives 4 hours away. And one of my favorites, from a woman named Jill Peterson, who felt nauseated on the subway in New York City. As they pull into the 2nd Avenue stop, there's a garbage can perfectly positioned to help her out.
So the train doors open, and I'm beelining it for this can. And as I get there, out of the corner of my eye, I kind of see, like, another person heading my direction, kind of like going for the can, too. And, it's all coming up, and I'm throwing up, and as I'm throwing up in this can, this person who's coming towards me starts throwing up in the can, too, and we're both, like, simultaneously barfing into this can into the subway station, and we kind of look at each other, like, whoa, I don't know, how are you feeling? And she's like, oh, I'm feeling a little bit better now. I'm like, me too.
What's the only way to survive throwing up in front of a subway car full of strangers? Have a nice girl your age do it with you. And numbers. So many coincidences with numbers. One woman told us how she was at Thanksgiving with her extended family, and they suddenly realized that 6 of them had the exact same number of letters in their names. 23 letters.
Michael Arthur Vantaputty, Mary Elizabeth Vantaputty, William Arthur Vantaputty.
There was the guy at the mall doing surveys who had to ask people their phone number. It's obvious the guy who's surveying starts to make up a number. He says 933-45-6.
When he read off that last number, he said 8, and I kind of stepped back for a second, but I was cool, and I said, "No, sir, I'm sorry. That's not your phone number." And he said, "Well, why isn't that my phone number?" And I said, "Because that's my phone number. That's my phone number. The phone number that you just made up is actually my phone number."
These stories reminded me of an old Chinese saying I once heard. Actually, I learned it a couple weeks ago, and I have no idea how old it is. But it goes like this.
不巧不成书.
That's my friend Yuan Yuan D.
不巧不成书.
And what does it mean?
If there's no coincidence, there won't be stories.
No coincidence, no story.
To imply that, of course, lives are all developed in the ways that we can't predict.
So is it like if you heard a story with a coincidence, afterwards you might be like, no coincidence, no story, like that?
That's right, yes. Just expression you use it to quote.
Is it like a corny thing to say?
Mostly, I think, no, it won't be a corny thing to say.
Do you ever use it?
When I'm corny, yes.
At the risk of being corny, I'm going to say it. Today's show, no coincidence, no story. While the big man's away, we're going to sneak these coincidence stories onto the air. All the stories you'll hear today first aired on our show in 2013, so about 4 years ago. And they're all verified true stories that my colleagues hid from me until the actual interviews, so it wouldn't spoil the surprise, which is also why there is so much unprofessional giggling this hour. And full disclosure, I came into this topic a coincidence skeptic, believing that a coincidence is just a coincidence, nothing more. I judged, I confronted weakness, I countered wide-eyed faith with statistical probability, and by the end, well, stay with us. Act 1, Grandmas. Blake Oliver is living in Nicaragua right now. We talked on Skype. About 4 months ago, he was on the phone to his friend Camille, who goes by Cammy. He mentioned to her that the screensaver on his iPhone had been the same picture for a long time, that he wanted to change it.
So I asked her to just send me a picture of something.
Uh-huh.
And it was really funny. She ended up sending me this picture of her as a little kid as a joke.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, yeah, that's kind of funny. I was like, not what I was expecting, but that's funny. And then I glanced back at the picture, and I saw my grandma walking through behind her.
What?
Yeah, how crazy is that, right?
Very crazy. The picture was taken about 18 years ago. But you recognized her right away.
Oh, absolutely. There was no question. That was Grandma Joyce. It was without question Grandma Joyce.
Coincidences like this one usually have a dense nest of details to bolster the craziness. Here goes. Blake is from Michigan. That's where he met Camille. But Camille's family isn't from Michigan at all.
They're originally from Utah, Salt Lake City, Utah.
That's where she grew up.
Yeah, that's where she grew up.
Was this photo from Utah?
No, and that's the funny thing is my grandma lives in Melbourne, Florida. And I'm thinking, oh, she must have been in Utah and walked past it. And Cammy's like, no, that picture was taken in Parksville, Vancouver Island in Canada.
What?
Yeah, right?
Blake figured out that at the same time that Cammy and her family were on vacation in Vancouver, Grandma Joyce had gone there to visit some...
Yeah, and she has no idea if she's in the picture even.
Yeah, right. It's not
No
like,
clue.
yeah, she doesn't seem aware. But I have to say, it's a little, it's not a very crisp photo. Like, I'm sort of surprised you would recognize her right away.
Well, yeah, there's not a lot of... It's my grandma. I don't know. It's like... I was like...
20 years ago, for my first reporting job, I interviewed a woman who'd just turned 100 years old. I asked her, admittedly, a rookie question. What's the most amazing thing that's happened in your life? And she thought for a while, and then she said, the most interesting thing that happened to me was that on my first day at Patchogue School, the principal said to me, "What's your name?" I said, "Esther Tuttle." And he said, "I have a friend in Shelter Island by that name." I was 12, she said, and that, to me, was remarkable. This woman had seen the advent of cars and movies and computers and space travel, and this was her answer. At the time, I thought it was lame, that maybe Esther was losing it a little. But since I started hearing all these coincidence stories the last couple of weeks, I've reconsidered. Coincidences feel so rare, and that sticks with you, even when the coincidence is barely a coincidence at all. An academic study of people's reactions to coincidence stories from the early 1980s found that we have an egocentric bias toward our own coincidences, that people find stories that happen to them far more surprising than the same stories happening to other people. Case in point.
My name is Juliana Bontrager, and I'm 16 years old.
Juliana, she's got a problem with her grandmother.
My grandma has been obsessed with coincidences, and she finds them in her life all the time, and she always wants to tell everyone about them. And we get kind of annoyed with her sometimes because she thinks they're so incredible and how they happen to her all the time. And it's just, it's every time we see her, oh my gosh, you would not believe what happened to me. And they're always, I was at the hospital with, she lives with her cousin, so she takes her cousin to the doctor's office quite a bit for appointments and stuff, and she'll be sitting in the waiting room, and then, they'll drive to go get lunch after that, and they'll see the people they were waiting in the waiting room with at the restaurant. Mm-hmm. And I've always, I always thought that was funny, because it's like, yeah, that's a coincidence, but, maybe they're just going to get lunch too. Like, it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
So then, a while ago, I was doing a project in the English class. We were reading the Scarlet Letter book.
Uh-huh.
And I was, once we finished the book, our, end project was we had to come up with what our sin was, or what sin we struggled with the most. And I chose envy. So we had to create our own letter out of paper, and then we had to, safety pin it to our shirt and wear it around school the entire day. So as I was coloring in my letter and cutting it out, my mom was listening to the show Monk in the background. Mm-hmm. As we were watching it, I was literally cutting out my last, line on the letter E for envy, and it said on the show, I've studied the 7 sins, and the most prominent one is envy. Mm-hmm. As I was cutting out my letter. And so I immediately called my grandma and was telling her about it, and she was like, oh, that's a good one, yeah. And then I didn't really hear back from her after that, and I thought, well, maybe she's just envious of my great coincidence. and I was sitting there are you kidding? Mine was so much better. You just happened to run into a person twice in one day. I do that all the time, What are the odds that as I'm cutting out this letter E, they would talk about that on a show? And I was so confused about it.
Okay, so Juliana's coincidence is a common one. We've all had those moments when you're reading a certain word and then someone says it on the radio or on TV. But remember, Juliana's 16, so maybe this is the first time it's happening to her. Still, I'm on her side here. I think it is more remarkable than her grandmother's example of the people in the waiting room being at the restaurant. Do you have a phone where you can dial up your grandma right now?
I can try.
Try it.
Okay, 1 second.
So Juliana conferenced her grandmother in so we could settle this.
I'm here. Elaine Olson.
Elaine Olson, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, dear.
I laid out my argument for Elaine about the purity, and therefore superiority, of Juliana's example. But Elaine argued right back. There were several hours between the two sightings, plus the restaurant was about 4 miles from the hospital.
And in that 4-mile radius, you might say. I could have gone to any number of restaurants. The fact that I ran into her at that restaurant, I think is a coincidence.
I think it's
She could have gone any place too.
that's true. I mean, that's true. It's not that, I'm not saying it's not a coincidence. I'm just saying it's not maybe as pure as, like, you can break down the sort of probabilities of a certain kind of person in a certain kind of neighborhood going.
So,
You don't think so?
I don't think so. I think that is
Do you think you're somehow prone to coincidences? Like coincidences
I
find
don't
you
know.
more than they find other people?
I don't know. That's what why, in my own family, I've asked them, does this happen to you? And don't get, much of a response. But
Yeah,
I've
it's
asked
impossible to
friends,
argue it.
too.
So
And-
when you ask for coincidences, we have nothing to give to you because you're so set in your ways.
I'm 81. Okay, yeah, okay.
So what would Juliana have to experience in terms of a coincidence that would impress you, do you think? Like, what would it need to be?
And he had proposed to her.
I'm going to slow this down a sec just to let it sink in. Helen's mother had almost married Stephen's father, his late father, actually. He died when Stephen was 17. And how this all came out was that after they had dinner, they went back to Stephen's apartment. They were looking at Stephen's family photographs.
So, my future mother-in-law is flipping through the album, and she sees my dad. And so she asks, what was his name? And my mom tells the name, and, my future mother-in-law kind of just nods and kind of just moves on, keeps on flipping through the book, doesn't even say anything.
So imagine what she must have been feeling seeing that photo suddenly, just like flooded.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I think she'd be really good at poker.
Right. So Helen's mother says nothing, goes home. But later that night, she tells her daughter, this was the one, this was the man who might have been. She explained that the reason they hadn't married was because her father, Helen's grandfather, had chosen a different husband for her, the man who became Helen's father. All of them ended up living in the U.S., but they quickly lost touch. And Stephen didn't find out about any of this until a couple of days later.
That's when Helen, calls me up and says, I have something to tell you. And she tells me, and I was floored by it. Together we called my mom, and she put a good face on it. But she was pretty shocked.
Did she know that there had been this other woman that your father had been in love
That's
with?
the thing. My dad told her years and years ago. There was this other woman that I was in love with at one point. But long before I met you. But Mom was like, "Look, you have a past. I have a past. We all have a past. Who cares?" Of course, never thinking that she was going to share grandchildren with that woman. I mean, she later admitted to me that if she had known this from the very beginning, she would have not supported Helen and me. She would have, it would have just been like, look, being with the daughter of the other woman your dad loved, I mean, can't you find someone else?
How did you take this coincidence? Did it come to mean anything to you or to Helen?
Yeah. There's something about it, the fact that, I didn't have the time with my dad that I wished I had had.
Yeah.
And then suddenly to kind of have him be kind of an active part of my life again, to think that I could talk to my mother-in-law and hear what he was like in his 20s, something that my mom doesn't even know. And, Helen's father is a strong believer in the idea that somehow my dad somehow is behind all this, that somehow, he's kind of helped make all this happen.
At the time this next love story takes place, a guy named Paul Gretchen was working in a Chicago suburb called Arlington Heights. He'd just started dating a woman named Esther. They'd been out maybe 8 times.
And I thought maybe it was time to get exclusive or become boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever it was. And I was about to go out to lunch, and I was thinking about asking her on a Friday date that I had set up. and I went out to lunch. I stopped at the store prior to hitting the deli that I normally hit, and I got some change, went to the deli, ordered my sandwich. It was $6 or something like that. I pulled out a $5 from my wallet, and I pulled out the couple bucks change that I gotten from the store, handed the clerk one of the ones, and then I looked at it and I pulled it back. Written on the dollar in pencil was Esther. And I thought, oh, that's weird. You know, I'm thinking about asking her to go steady, and I get this dollar that says Esther on it. I'm sorry. So I stuck it in my pocket, you know, chuckled. I went to the store. I got one of those floating frames and a little piece of gold lame, and I stuck the dollar in the frame. So it was floating in the middle on this piece of gold, as if, you know, you're going to go in a church in Italy and they had a fragment from the robe of some saint or something like that. And I called it the Immaculate Dollar of Arlington Heights. So on Friday, I asked her out, and she was, you know, all excited, and we were all giddy. And then I said, hey, I have one more thing for you, and I gave her this frame with this dollar in it.
I start unwrapping it, and he's like, it's a dollar with your name on it, and he's all like beside himself, and I just look at him like, I'm freaked out.
She kind of furrowed her brow a little bit and looked concerned. And I said, you know, is there some sort of problem?
I was speechless for the first time ever. But I said, you know, remind me to tell you something later.
So, okay, you know, I let it go. And we, you know, we had a relationship, got engaged, got married. A couple years later, we were unpacking at a new apartment that we had. And I found the frame with the dollar in it. And I stuck it up on the dresser, and she came in the room. I said, hey, you never told me about this dollar. What's the deal with that? She said, well,
when I was 19, you know, I was a cashier working in a copy shop in downtown Chicago, and I was dating someone, and I just wasn't happy with him, and I just thought, you know, how do people know who the right person that they're meant to be with? How do they know who that is? I said, you know what, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to put my name on this dollar bill, and the guy that gets this dollar bill is going to be the guy that asks me to marry him. And I'm like, well, you can't just write your name on one. Actually, I think it was more like maybe 10 or 12. And so this dollar bill that you gave me, I believe is the same dollar bill that I wrote my name on. And I knew that we were going to be married the day that you gave me this dollar bill.
It was pretty crazy.
And then he made me tell him the story again.